Hi. Today we're working on something kind of different. This is the chassis of a NuTone Model 2065 AM/FM intercom master station. I thought I would do this video backwards. We're going to start with it taken apart and see where we go from there. So this was sent in by a customer recently. It really wasn't working much at all, and he said if we could rebuild it, he thinks that would be a really good idea. So I thought I'd go over it because this belongs to an unusual group of intercom systems that NuTone made in the very early 1970s. It's sort of its own little island of design. So even though I just put it all back together, let's take it apart just a little bit because it will make it easier for you to see what the challenge is and the uniqueness of a model like this is. Now, sometimes unique is good and sometimes unique is different. I'm not going to say bad, it's just different than other models. In the early 1970s, NuTone had this idea, as far as I can tell, that they needed an inexpensive system that you could of course put in your home, but also that could be put in manufactured homes. And there are versions of this that the model numbers begin with the letters MH, and it's unclear to me whether MH stood for manufactured homes or whether it stood for mobile homes. And maybe mobile homes and manufactured homes are the same things. I don't know. Things have changed a lot since 1970, so I don't know how people looked at it back in those days. This is as far apart as I'm going to take it. I could take the big tuning dial wheel off, but we don't want to risk tangling up the tuner cord because that's a real pain in the neck to deal with. Before we go any further on this side, let's go ahead and flip it over carefully. The power is shut off to it, and you can sort of see what we're dealing with here. And let me explain to you a little bit about what all this is. The models that we're talking about are the models 2063, 2065, and then the MH models. There's MH14 and 8, and then MH13 and 7. And then there were also models MH5, 15, and 16. So it's a pretty wide-ranging group of systems. Altogether, there are 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 different models that encompass this whole idea of inexpensive systems that could be put into mobile homes or manufactured homes or something like that. I'm going to guess that the goal here was to keep the price as low as possible. So what they did was they went to a company in Japan, and I don't know who that company is because I'm going to find out. And what they did essentially was they bought a pre-made AM/FM tuner board or assembly that had a little amplifier built into it and so on and so on. And this, I assume, was a sort of a commercially available universal board that you could buy. And then they adapted it and added on to it, sort of bodged in a bunch of stuff to turn it into a music intercom master station. If we start at the beginning, right here, we have a low voltage power transformer, which is unusual for NuTone systems at this point in time. Earlier models, sure, they had them, but not like this. And this is an unusual one because, as you I think can see here, I have it connected to my bench power supply. This could be installed in two different ways. This 2065 used a fairly standard NuTone 30 volt 20 watt remotely mounted transformer. You'd put it in your basement or garage or someplace and run wires to this. And if you did it that way, you would connect those wires to the green and white wires here. So you're feeding 30 volts into this, which is reducing it down to the correct voltages to power the board. This transformer also has a blue wire, and if you were installing this in a mobile home or manufactured home, we're just going to say manufactured homes from now on because it sounds better, then you could also connect it directly to 110, and you didn't need the 30 volt low voltage transformer because this would take its place. In a manufactured home, it was one less thing you had to buy. It would be easier to install, although there were some interesting things about that because there is no junction box for the 110 connection inside the wall housing, and that's a little on the dicey side even in 1970. However, that's the way they designed it. So you have this. This is your input selector switch, and you'll see at the end, this system has 3 settings. You have AM, FM, and there's an auxiliary input. How an auxiliary input is usually an RCA plug somewhere that you could plug an extra device into. Back in those days, it would be a cassette player. I guess it could be a record player still, or maybe an 8-track player. However, even though the switch has a setting for it, there is no auxiliary jack. And I did search through all the installation instructions, all of the service manuals, all of the service bulletins for all of those different models, and nowhere does it show like, whoops, we forgot to put a jack in and this is how you can do it if your customer wants it. So I'm not sure exactly what the idea of all of that would have been. Then you've got your one and only main board. This board is primarily all radio tuner, AM and FM. You got a little bit of power supply, and you've got a little bit of audio amplifier here. These are the 2 audio amplifier output transistors, and they're screwed down to the steel chassis with this little clip bracket thing to act as a heat sink so they don't overheat and burn up. Then we have your basic on-off volume control assembly here. You have, this is an audio input matching transformer, because you have to match, it's going to be an intercom system too, you have to match and give it the ability to drive more than one speaker. The easiest way to do that is by using a matching transformer. You have a standard 5-inch NuTone 3.2 ohm speaker cone that's in the master station, and you've got this little switchboard assembly here which gives you volume control for the master station speaker here, and then you've got your talk and listen switch and door speaker on and off switch, and another little audio matching transformer there. These 2 brown leads right here, these are the AM and FM antenna leads, and they plug into clips inside the wall housing. That's pretty much all that you have. It's not a lot to it. This whole entire chassis assembly was assembled in Japan. Now, I'm unsure about this board because this board is entirely different design and build quality. Maybe quality is not the right word. It's more like the sets that NuTone manufactured, like a 2090. This looks a lot like the type of board and the way it was designed for other models from the same time. So it could be that these chassis came to NuTone pre-assembled, and then this was all attached on later on. Not really sure about that. If we flip it back over, you can see in this area mostly it happens underneath the tuning wheel also, but again, I'm not taking that apart. You have a lot of bodged on wires, and in this close-up view you can see like there's this yellow wire that goes from here to underneath, and it goes to one of the switch assemblies, and then there's a green wire and it goes around and soldered on there, and there's this purple wire and a red wire, and this is the ground lead, and this looks like an audio cable because I know there's a ground shield on it, and then these red wires come across and they're soldered on here, and the blue ones go through, and there's all of this, and there's actually, if you lift the pointer up out of the way just a little bit, you can see there's these little polyester caps down here that were added to the board. There's some of those up under here, and there's more jumper wires and everything. So what they did essentially was they added onto or bodged onto your basic AM, FM little amplifier radio tuner board a whole bunch of other things to turn it into a music intercom master station, which is kind of interesting. Now these systems, because they're so simple, there's not usually a lot to go wrong with them. The most common problems, just like this one had, was that this one was made in, I think, 1972. It was simply old and tired. A lot of the capacitors had failed, and it just didn't really work the way it was supposed to anymore. It's just a matter of going through and replacing those parts. However, as simple as that sounds, it's not as simple as you think. The biggest challenge on working on something like this is that you've got all this junk in the way. So this has to come off. so you can get to the area under this board. And a lot of the parts you have to change out. You've got to like push wires out of the way because you don't want to melt the insulation on the wires, and sometimes you have to desolder wires because they're covering up points where you have to desolder to take components off. One of the biggest challenges on working on something like this is that you have to take this tuning dial off, and wrapped around it is the tuning cord. If we start here at the pointer, the cord goes here over the top of this standoff, then it goes down here to the tuning knob, and it's wrapped around it several times, and then it goes back up, back over this standoff again, then it goes to the drum, it goes around the drum, and at one point it's tied, it has this spring to give it tension on the two ends. That's why there's two cords here, and then it goes here and it goes around this one and it goes back around. So when you take this off, this dial cord, everything becomes loose and floppy. What I do is I use masking tape and I mask it in place as much as I possibly can to try to keep it all in its original position, because when you take this off, you need to move it out of the way to be able to get to the solder pads to remove components and replace them. And you're turning the set over and over and over and over to do that. And if things get out of hand and come loose, you end up with a dial cord lying on the workbench, and then you have to restring the whole thing, which, trust me, it's a total pain in the neck. If you look really carefully, you probably can't see it, but right here it says chassis is made in Japan. So this came as a complete unit. Back in the day, if you needed to do repairs on these, or I suppose if it was a warranty situation, what you could order from NuTone was not just the board or not just the switch. You could only order the complete chassis. It actually came in a plastic bag with wrappings around it to protect it. You would change out the whole entire chassis because it was just considered to be one part or one assembly. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? So here's our little NuTone Model 2065 all reassembled. One of the things I like about this model a lot is I like the way it looks. It was an inexpensive entry-level model for its day, but they restyled the grille, and it has a very solid early 1970s look to it. It's not fancy, it's not flashy, but it's very nice. You have this nice brown plastic grille. You have the new NuTone 70s type logo here, and then you've got your brown control knobs. You got radio tuning, auxiliary input, which we'll come back to in a second, system volume, master speaker volume, and then your intercom talk and listen switch, and your door speaker on and off switch. This is a 3-wire system, and it uses the old-fashioned type of entry door stations that actually have a talk button on them. If the door speaker is left turned on, it will actually play music through the entry door station. And that's kind of a throwback to the very earliest intercoms that NuTone used to make, because it's less expensive and it takes less circuitry and less components to not have a separate door talk and listen switch. So again, cost was everything on a model like this. It plays really well, and one of the things I learned, because we all learn things as we go along, is the reason that you have 3 inputs, you have FM, AM, and auxiliary. I found this in the setup and initial testing procedure part of the service manual, is you have FM for FM radio, you have AM for AM radio, and you have auxiliary like that. Not because there's supposed to be an auxiliary input jack for another music source, but you can leave the system on so the intercom's on and ready to go without having the radio play. In the service manual, it's referred to as the silent mode setting. So it wasn't supposed to have an auxiliary jack. It was just to cut the audio off from the radio so you could leave it on and someone came to your front door and you could answer it and ask who's there. What happened to all of these models over time? Well, these types of models, all the 2063 and 2065 and all those MH models that they made, they were all consolidated down in 1974 when the new series of IM intercoms came out, IM Intercom Master, and those were the days of IM 406s and 303s and IM 203s. And all of these models, like this model itself, actually transformed into a NuTone IM203. And an IM203 has the same basic type of construction with a modified radio amplifier board on a chassis that came from Japan, and it was the entry-level builder model intercom of its day. All of those 9 other models were all basically coalesced into one version, which was the IM203. That's it. Sort of an overview of an unusual NuTone model. It's a very nice looking model. It's very appealing. It doesn't seem very dated, at least not to my eyes, but then again, I have NuTone eyes. I see things differently than everyone else. I hope you found this interesting, and maybe for someone it will be helpful. If it is, give it a thumbs up on YouTube, because that helps us just a little bit. There'll be a banner right here that shows you how to subscribe. Go to our YouTube homepage, click on the bell, and when you click on the bell, click on it to receive all notifications. And every time we post a new video, you'll get a notification and you can watch it. That's all for today. See you on the next video.